time I dug for worms, I was 8 years old in an elementary school playground. Most of my recess days were spent digging for worms. Not because I aspired to be a nematologist, but because I was tired of seeing the same kid dig for worms alone every day. You see, he dug his fingers into the dirt, pulled out a stretchy and very frightened worm, laid it flat on his palm and admired it, and then tossed it into the bucket beside him to be released back into the wild later. So, one day, I decided to dig too. The same student who spent his time digging for worms alone every day also happened to be the only deaf student in my 3rd grade class. Together we dug for all types of worms. Skinny worms, long worms, squishy worms, and fat worms. We didn't care. Digging for worms led to dirty jeans and muddy shoes, and dirty jeans and muddy shoes led to an angry bus driver that afternoon and an even angrier mother waiting for me at home. But it also led to the first best friend I ever made. The first word I learned in sign language was worm. It took me 4 months to become conversational, and by the time I turned 9, I was completely fluent. Because at that point, we had created a community. It was a community of 2 9-year-olds digging for worms together in an elementary school playground. Most of my sign language education took place for my best friend while digging for worms, and soon enough I was immersed in the deaf culture scene. Administrators pulled me out of classes to tutor other deaf students in math and science, and after school I'd run home from the bus stop and dive onto my couch at home to turn on the TV. Not to watch, of course, but to use what was being said on the television to practice my sign language at home. At the tender age of 9 years old, sign language became my life. Sign language is more than just a collection of gestures and a means for communicating, but it's the language of experience, and it allows me to experience my ideas in a way that verbal communication could never provide for me. My favorite thing about sign language is how it forces you to flesh out your emotions. Today more than ever, people are what I would call emotionally constipated. See, we're allowed to lend ourselves to our emotions in fear of looking soft or malleable in how we feel. For me, since sign language was a nonverbal language, I spoke with my emotions. If I'm angry, my nose scrunches and my eyes glare, and if I'm happy, my eyebrows dance and my lips part, and if I'm excited, my eyes magnify and my mouth smiles. So I want you to think about any word that is related to the idea of unity. You see, the sign for family is 2 F's creating a circle. This same trend follows for any other word that also reintroduces the idea of unity. So for group, it would be 2 G's making that same circular motion. And for team, it would be 2 T's making that same circular motion. For much of my life, sign language was a way for me to relearn what words really meant. The sign for family isn't 2 F's making a straight line. It's not 2 F's forming a semicircle, but it's 2 F's creating a complete circle, reteaching us that group, team, and family are unbreakable bonds, things stronger than any ionic or covalent bond. 2 out of every 1,000 individuals in the United States are functionally deaf. So if you relate this back to UNC's campus, this converts to roughly 60 deaf Carolina students out of a campus of 30,000, meaning that this is a very small community. American Sign Language was invented in 1817 within a likewise small deaf community in Hartford, Connecticut, after the opening of the first American school for the deaf. In 1980, Nicaragua opened its first school for the deaf. Prior to the establishment of the school, there was no established deaf community. Deaf individuals who had been isolated and ignored their entire lives brought with them the sign language that he or she used at home. It wasn't standardized, but it worked for communication. The following year, the new class of students to enroll at the school picked up on the assemblage of signs and started to normalize it, spontaneously crafting rules for verb agreement and grammar. And with time, this school became the birthplace of Nicaraguan Sign Language. See, American and Nicaraguan Sign Language are unsurprisingly 2 different languages because they were formed by 2 different groups of people living amongst 2 different areas of the world, not because we speak English in America and Spanish in Nicaragua. This is a sign for where in American Sign Language, as in, where are the cookies? And this is a sign for where in British Sign Language, as in, where are the bloody biscuits? Now, I'm not exactly sure why anybody would want a bloody biscuit, but the point that I'm getting at is that American Sign Language is almost unintelligible by users of British Sign Language, and that 69% of their words are different. So why are there two different types of sign language between the US and the UK? I mean, we both speak English, right? This question would make sense if sign language was created and then handed to deaf individuals to behave as some type of assistive device. But the truth of the matter is, sign language was developed organically out of pockets of deaf individuals interacting with one another. Sign language is a growing language, and as a newer language, it is still shaping, informing, and molding itself to fit amongst the community surrounding it, whether it be cultural communities, social communities, and even academic communities. So take a moment and pretend that you are studying to become a physicist, and that the only way of studying and communicating words like velocity, acceleration, and vector is by fingerspelling them, letter after letter. Do you realize how long it takes to pause and fingerspell acceleration in the midst of solving a problem on how much faster Mary drives compared to Frank? Do you realize how long it takes to pause and fingerspell in the midst of solving a problem on the angle that Tiffany has to dive at in order to grab a pizza that slides off of a frictionless surface, and then using that information to then calculate the velocity at which Miley Cyrus swings in on a wrecking ball? How many physics terms did you just count in those two problems? Now, what I'm getting at is not that those were two really bad examples of real-life applications of physics, because, well, they were, but that up until recent years, scientific terms like these were improvised by deaf students, educators, and researchers simply because there was no widely accepted term for many of these signs. So what happens next? How does language shape and mold the way that a community interacts? As we live in an ever more global world, we are constantly finding ways of redefining our world and our interactions. But a few years ago, projects to standardize scientific words in sign language took the internet by storm. Universities all around the globe began accepting online video submissions from anyone, all around the world, to create a more unified sign language vocabulary for scientific words. They encourage collaboration amongst the scientific community on a global scale to create a more widely accepted array of scientific terms. In 2013, just last year, the British Sign Language Glossary Project at the University of Edinburgh produced a list. It was a list of over 100 newly created sign language terms for physics and engineering. 2 of these terms come in handy for even hearing science students. 2 of these terms included mass and weight. Mass and weight are commonly mixed up in physics classes. Mass is the measurement of the amount of matter in something, and weight is the measurement of the amount of force acting on an object due to gravity. Now I know, all that sounded like a foreign language to you all. I told you, I taught sign language, not physics. But what I'm getting at is, the sign for mass was established to be a balled up fist, floating in space constant with no forces acting upon it. The sign for weight was established to be that same balled up fist, but changing depending on the forces acting upon it. So tell me now, do you get the difference between mass and weight? In my many years of learning, interpreting, and teaching sign language, I've learned that sign language lives. Its pulse lives in the hands of the people who use it, and its beauty is found in shaping and mobilizing communities to take an idea, dig it into the ground, cover it with leftover dirt, water it and foster it through collective action, and then take a step back and watch it grow and transform. See, alone I can only do so little, but together we can do so much. From global communities, digging for a more scientific, standardized way of communicating science through sign language, to Nicaraguan and American communities digging for an official regional sign language, to 2 8-year-olds digging for worms on an elementary school playground, the exchange of experiences, languages, and ideas shape the way that our communities interact. So the first time I dug for worms, I was 8 years old in an elementary school playground. But that afternoon, I was not digging for worms. I was digging for a community. Little did I know sign language would become something that looked beyond me. See, communicating with those different from yourself can be challenging, but I've learned that it's worth the exploration, even if I had to dig a little deeper, and not just for worms. Thank you.